You're listening to the Heart Lessons Podcast with me, Sarah Rieke. Real women, real stories, real faith. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and I'm so glad to have you joining me here today. Today, you are listening to episode 54 of the podcast, and it is going to feature my son, Micah. Earlier this summer, my son asked if he could be on the podcast again, and he was actually on the first year that I did it, so about 2 years ago on episode 22 of the podcast. And that was the year that we were anticipating the birth of our Silas, who is going to be 2 very soon. And so they were on that. Him and Jocelyn were on that episode. But he asked me if he could be on the show again. And then when I realized that I was going to get the opportunity to talk to Kathleen Fucci, who was on the show last week, and she was sharing all about her ministry for helping grieving children, I asked Micah if he would be willing to come on the podcast and talk about what it was like losing his siblings from his perspective. And he said that he would be happy to. And then many of you submitted your questions to him. And so that is the episode that we are going to feature on today's podcast. But I wanted to go ahead and give you, I guess, sort of the timeline or background or just a little bit more details about what actually happened in our family so that when Micah starts to talk about it, you'll have a little bit of context. So when Micah was about 18 months old, and this was in 2012, so he was about 18 months old when we found out that the baby that I was pregnant with, our first daughter, Evie, was going to pass away. She had fatal anomalies, multiple. And so the doctors told us that she would not live long, if at all, after birth. And of course, we were absolutely devastated. And so it was very life-changing for me, just incredibly so. And Micah was so young at the time that he didn't really understand what was happening, but I think he was perceptive enough to know that something was off because I was crying all the time. And so I know he picked up on just the emotional aspect of everything. And so my husband had told Micah, even though he was only about 1.5, he said, Mama's going to be really sad. And so if you see her crying, just make sure you give her a hug and a kiss and just be very kind to mommy. And so that was exactly what he did. He has always been just really emotionally aware. And so even at such a young age, he would be so sweet if he saw me crying and he would give me a hug. And, I don't know how much he was able to understand, but, about what was going on. But I would still tell him, mommy's going to have a baby and she's not going to come home with us. I tried to prepare him as best I could for just how you would prepare a child if you were having any baby, healthy or not, just that, he might wake up in the middle of the night and mommy and daddy wouldn't be here. One of his grandparents would be there taking care of him, if we had gone to the hospital or something. So I tried to prepare him just as you would prepare for any sibling, just with the added element of, she won't be coming home with us. And whether or not he understood, I don't know, but that is what I tried to do. And I even tried to make it a little special for him. We went to the store and we picked out a little plush toy for him to give to the baby. And so he would talk about, when we go to the hospital and see baby Evie, you can give her this special little toy. And so, I don't know, I just tried my best to make it a sweet experience for him. And again, not exactly sure how much he was able to understand at that point, but I just tried my best to kind of bring him in to what was happening to the level that felt appropriate. About 6 weeks before Micah turned 2, so he was, 22 and a half months, if you want to get really specific. That's when Evie was born. She was born at the beginning of November, and his birthday is the end of December. And he was actually there when she was born because she had a crazy dramatic delivery story. I'll put a link to her birth story on my blog in the show notes. And then also I was able to share it on the Through the Lens podcast. So I will link to both of those if you want to hear her crazy delivery story. But Micah was actually there at the hospital when she was born. And all of our family was there as well. And it was so sweet to have him there because, it was very emotional just knowing that we were going to lose this baby girl very soon. And so just to have his sweetness there, honestly, was just really helpful for everyone. It was just great to have his presence and his energy and his sweetness there. And that little toy that we had gone to the store to buy. And I had talked about this moment for so many weeks, when the baby comes, you're going to give her this special toy. And when the moment came, he just buckled under the pressure, and instead of like handing it gently to her and giving her a little kiss as I had envisioned, he kind of just tossed it to her. And we all just laughed. We actually have it on video. It's one of my favorite memories of when Evie was born. So then after she passed away, she lived for 4 hours. And after she passed away, he went home with my in-laws, and they took care of him. And, it was a really emotional time for all of us. We came home later that next day around lunchtime or so. And, my world was just completely shaken up. And it was really hard to resume normalcy, as you can imagine, just like with this piece of my heart that was missing. And so I feel like one thing that I did was try to relive the moments that we had with Evie with Micah and kind of through Micah. And I wanted to just talk about it all the time. And since he was pretty much the only person that was around me all the time, I would just ask him constantly, do you remember baby Evie? And, what it was like when she was here, and now she went to Jesus. And I know I said that often. She's gone to Jesus. She went to go be with Jesus. And he would often, respond and talk about it with me. And then after a few weeks, I noticed that he just kind of shut off whenever I started talking about her. And he couldn't have been much more than 2. And I just realized all of a sudden that it was just too much for him, and he didn't understand what actually happened. And he was even articulate enough to say, he said, Evie's skewy, that Evie was scary, and that talking about her was making him scared. And I realized that I was making him afraid because he thought that Jesus was somebody that takes kids away from their mommy. And I just felt so horrible, as you can imagine. And so right then and there, I just determined to stop, trying to relive all those moments with him and through him. It just wasn't a healthy way for me to process, and it certainly wasn't fair for me to expect him to help me process my grief. And so from that point on, it's not that I completely stopped talking about Evie, but I think probably what happened more from that point on, is that I just took his lead. If he saw a picture and mentioned her, I would talk about it, but I didn't put anything on him anymore. And of course, I was just so grieved and just praying that I hadn't done irreversible damage to his little psyche about, spiritual things and about who Jesus actually was. And I know there were so many nights that I kneeled by his bed and I just cried, and I just prayed that the Lord would reverse anything that I may have done that wasn't good. And I had people praying alongside of me, just that his heart would not be afraid of the Lord, that it would be open to spiritual things and to the gospel, and that he would be tender towards Jesus and not see him as someone who's fearful that takes kids from babies, but just the truth of who Jesus is. And I'm so happy to report that when he was just a little over 4 years old, he made a profession of faith. He asked Jesus into his heart, and I believe that was a very genuine salvation experience. So praise God for that. And so for anyone who is in the shoes that I was in, where you're just thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? I don't know if I've done some really damaging things to him as far as his understanding of who God is. Just give it time and give it prayer, and the Lord can redeem even those mistakes. I am living proof. So that was sort of his experience with Evie. And then when he was about 4.5 is when we found out that baby Charlie was going to pass away. And so at that point, I had Micah, who was 4, and Jocelyn was almost 1, when she was 1 month away from turning 1 when we found out that diagnosis. And we had both kids in the room with us when we were going to find out the gender of the baby, because we thought, oh, it's going to be so exciting, and they'll find out if they're having a brother or sister. And then, of course, the turn of events were much different than just pure joy. And so the kids were there with us, and Jocelyn was only, goodness, I think she really was 11 months old. So she was pretty unaware of what was happening, but Micah knew, he understood. He was very sad. He cried quite a bit after the appointment, and thankfully, the Lord had brought me through the experience with Evie the first time to just know how to better handle this with Micah, and how to better communicate with him, and just check in with him emotionally. And so I just determined, because I already had made the mistake, I just determined to follow his lead on everything. And maybe, I don't know if I did it once a day, but definitely several times a week throughout the rest of my pregnancy, I would say, how are you feeling about the baby? What are you thinking about all of it? And most of the time he'd say, good, I'm good. And sometimes he would have questions, and sometimes he would talk about it, but he was rarely, very overwhelmed and sad about it all. Sometimes he had questions, but most of the time, he's just a happy little 4-year-old kid. So that was kind of, what we did. And then again, with both kids, I just prepared them for what it would be like to expect another sibling. There might be a time when you wake up in when you wake up in the morning and mom and dad are not home. So again, just preparing them as you would the arrival of any sibling. When it came time for Charlie to be born, the kids were with us again. They went to the hospital and family met us there to take care of the kids. But I think it ended up just being a good experience for both of them. Well, I guess I'm not necessarily positive it was good for Jocelyn. She was so young. She was about 14 months when Charlie was born and passed away. But, Micah was a little closer to 5. And for both of them, I bought little disposable cameras so they could take pictures of their little brother. And I just thought it would be really sweet to see what they thought were good moments, meaningful moments to take pictures of. And, I did want them to be there to see their sibling at some point, because I just thought, they had been part of the story. They were there when we received the diagnosis, throughout the pregnancy, when we had talked about what to expect. And I just thought, they need some closure. They just need to see what this is all about. And so I am glad that they were able to see their little brother. And he was not alive for very long. And so he was not living for most of the time when they were with him. But, it was really okay. I don't regret that at all. I think it was good for them. And it really was a sweet time for, even though it was incredibly sad. So after Charlie passed away, I did the very same thing I did, after the diagnosis. I just would check in from time to time, how are you doing? How are you feeling about this? Try to answer questions if he had any. But honestly, most of the time he just said, I'm good. I feel fine. There was only one time I can remember that he was acting kind of off. And I was like, buddy, are you okay? And he just said, I miss baby Charlie. And he just started crying. And I said, of course, I wish you were here too. And so we had a moment of just some pretty hard tears. But that was the only time I can really remember after Charlie passed away that Micah had a big emotional, I guess, venting, if you want to call it that. But most of the time I just checked in, definitely once a day, shortly after his birth and death, and then just has sort of tapered off over time. But I knew at that point that it wasn't good for me to project or to process through my kids. And so that was something I tried really hard not to do. I was there for them for questions or processing or what have you, but I really didn't want to project my feelings on them or sort of relive the moments through them. And so I guess that brings us to, what is it like for us today as a family? A bereaved family. We've lost 2 babies. We have 3 living children under a roof, but there are 2 that we don't have. And, sometimes we feel that void more than other times. But I do have photos available. We have special toys that kind of represent or maybe not toys, stuffed animals that represent each sibling. And the pictures and the stuffed animals are available for the kids. They're not hidden or anything. They know exactly where they are. So if they choose to bring it up, I'm of course more than happy to talk about it. And again, answer any questions they might have or just respond to their memories of what they might remember. But for the most part, it is following their lead on losing their siblings. Most recently, Jocelyn, who just turned 4, she gets very sad that she doesn't have a sister. And she says, I miss my sister. I wish I had a sister to play with. And in those moments when she starts crying, I usually just try to pause whatever I'm doing and hold her and say, I wish she was with us as well. I miss her too. And, we just kind of have a moment. And it doesn't usually last very long. After she cries for a little bit, we try to, do some things, read a book together or something. But for the most part, that is the extent of it for her. And then Silas, he's so little. We haven't quite encountered how we're going to, introduce him to his siblings yet. But we'll figure it out. So that is kind of the summary and the timeline of events of how we lost Evie and Charlie. Evie was in 2012, Charlie was in 2015. So I guess we're coming up on what would be his third birthday, which is crazy to think about. So I guess if I were to summarize my experience as a bereaved mother, just trying to help my children process their grief, it would be number one, not to expect my living children to validate my feelings of loss or grief, like not look to them to help me process or to even meet my level of grief and find like a kindred grieving spirit, because I shouldn't look to my children to fulfill that in me. Of course, ultimately, I should look to the Lord for that. But then, of course, my husband or close friends and family that was there, that is probably more healthy and more appropriate way for me to grieve instead of looking to do that through my kids. Probably the second thing I would say, I've said it several times, but just to take the kids' lead on their questions or starting a discussion. That's not to say I'd never, bring up their names. I don't mean that at all. They're part of our family, Evie and Charlie. And so if we're talking about things, and it brings up a memory or something, I'll bring up their name, but I don't, again, just going back to the projection, I guess, I don't initiate anything in order to project or process through my kids. And I think the third suggestion I would give to a mother in my situation who's also trying to help her children is to take time to explore your own questions so you can give honest answers and answers that you have processed yourself. And of course, it's always okay to say, I'm not sure of the answer to that question. Let's find out together, or let me read about it and I'll come back to you and let you know. But I think we should always be seeking answers to our own questions so that when the kids come to us, we have a pretty solid foundation of what we believe ourselves so that we can share that with our kids. And Kathleen Fucci from last week, she had some incredible resources on just how to know more about who God is and who he is through suffering that can kind of lay that foundation for us so that we can have that foundation to stand on when we're trying to reach our kids in their grief. And so I'll link to her episode in the show notes and her show notes as well, because there were some great resources there. All right, well, that was just kind of the precursor to Micah's segment of the podcast. And so here is my son answering some of your questions about children and grief, and then also just answering some questions that I had for him of how to help other children who are grieving the loss of their siblings. So without further ado, here's my sweet buddy, Micah. Well, Micah, Rieke, welcome to the Heart Lessons podcast.
Yay!
So Micah is my son, and he really wanted to come on the podcast and talk with other kids who may have lost siblings before. And so I just thought, what a nice idea to offer encouragement to other kids who may have lost siblings. And so that's what we're going to do today. Micah is going to answer some questions that I have, just some sort of interview questions, and then answer some questions that some of you guys submitted to ask him about what it was like to lose a sister and a brother when they were babies. So, Micah, thanks for being willing to share your story.
Okay.
All right, so let's start here at the beginning. Will you tell me, Micah, from your perspective, what happened to Evie and Charlie?
They died because some parts of their body wasn't working very good.
Yeah, that's right. And do you remember how old you were when each one of them passed away?
No.
Okay, well, when Evie passed away, you were almost 2, and when Charlie passed away, you were, almost 4. So it's been a little while, because now you're 7.
Mm-hmm.
But you still remember some, and we still have, it still impacts our family. So, buddy, what do you feel when you think about your siblings?
Nice and, lovable.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And good to have around.
How about your siblings that passed away? What do you feel when you think about them?
A little bit sad.
A little bit sad. How often do you think about them?
A lot. Because usually Jocelyn says a lot of stuff about Evie.
Yeah, like what? What does she say?
I want my sister.
Yeah, she's been saying that a lot lately.
Every time Mom says to do something.
That is true. We're trying to weed through what's actual feelings and what is just an excuse to not obey.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that she's feeling.
Yeah.
So I tried to just take a minute and talk about it with her. But what other feelings do you think about or feel when you think about Evie and Charlie? Anything else?
Like I wish that I could have them back
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, me too. Do you have any questions for God about your siblings that passed away?
Sometimes in bed I already prayed about them.
Yeah? Like what? What do you ask the Lord?
That that they're safe and that they're having a good time.
Yeah. So you just talk to God about like what they might be doing in
Yeah.
heaven. Oh, that's
Yes.
very good. What about questions about like why it happened? Do you have anything like that?
Not really.
Not really? How come?
I don't know.
If you start to get sad about Evie and Charlie, what do you think about that helps you not be sad?
Praying usually helps a lot of things when you're sad or anything, any emotions.
Yeah. So like when you're feeling sad about them and you pray, what do you pray about? Like what words are in your prayer?
To help me not be sad and to just think about what good time they're having and that they're safe.
Yeah.
That I don't really need to worry about them.
Yeah, that's right. Because we know in heaven that they are safe. They're not
Yep.
crying. They don't even fall down and skin their knee. They don't even need Band-Aids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think Silas will need anything that is with boo-boos. He doesn't even care.
Silas, yeah, he's tough.
He just says ouch. And that's the only thing he says. Just ouch.
Yeah. So Silas is our baby, our 1-year-old little guy. He's pretty tough. Micah, what would you tell another kid who lost a sibling that might help them feel better or might give them some comfort or encouragement?
To probably pray to God about them. What I've been saying a lot. Because that helps a lot of things every time.
Why do you think it helps to pray?
Because God can do anything.
Yeah,
And God is the one that you pray. Or Jesus.
that's right. Is there anything that your mommy or daddy do to help you process your siblings that you lost? Anything that we do that you like that actually helps, or maybe something that we do that you don't like? How can mommy and daddy help you? Or maybe some things we try to help that aren't actually that helpful?
Sometimes you help of maybe like doing something fun the next day or today or something like that.
Like if you feel sad about Evie and Charlie, then we do an activity?
Yeah, like something fun.
Yeah.
Usually you do that when I'm sad sometimes.
Oh, well, I'm glad.
Or maybe when I don't really know what to think of.
Okay. Do your friends, do you ever tell your friends about Evie and Charlie?
Yes.
Yeah, and then what do they usually say?
They usually say that it's really sad. They said that I'm sorry for you, especially my best friends at school say that.
Have you ever had somebody like not understand what happened and they don't really respond?
No.
What do you say to them? Like, what do you tell your friends just like out of the blue? Like, I have siblings that passed away. What do you say?
I said that I had a brother and a sister that passed away a little bit ago. Not a little bit, probably just a while ago. And they usually sometimes they don't really understand.
Yeah.
Because some people in my class don't even have siblings.
Plus, it's not like normally how it works for babies to die. So sometimes that can be confusing for a kid.
Yeah.
I know one time I overheard you telling our neighbor, and she just like looked at you like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
So sometimes that happens, and that's okay. All right. Micah, here are a few questions from people from Instagram and from Facebook, and they wanted to ask you.
On the phone.
They wanted to ask you about Evie and Charlie. So here is one question from a listener. Do you ever get sad about Evie and Charlie just because your mommy is sad?
Not really. Sometimes I do, but sometimes not.
How come?
I don't really know. Because I usually don't stay where Mom is. Usually I usually play something, or maybe sometimes I wear headphones.
Yeah. Well, I think I probably don't cry about Evie and Charlie as much as I did before.
Jossie does a lot.
Yeah. She gets sad about not having a sister. So maybe when I cried more, you don't remember because you were not even 2 and then 4, so that might be different.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for a mommy to talk about Evie and Charlie too much?
That's actually a hard question.
Oh yeah? Why is it hard?
I don't know. Maybe. Not really.
Not really? It's okay to talk about them?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we talk about them that you like? Like, what do we do that makes you feel like you remember that you have siblings, but we don't necessarily bring it up all the time?
I usually say that I wish.
You wish they were here.
Yeah. A lot of times I do.
And it's okay to have those thoughts. And then we pause and we talk about them when you have those feelings. But
yeah. And then you can do something else that might help a little bit.
Like what?
Like something that you really like to do. Like maybe a favorite toy, or maybe a show or a movie.
Yeah. Popcorn in a movie always works.
Yes.
Okay. Do you ever feel sad when you see other kids with siblings and you don't have what they do, and then what do you do about it? And I know that question's a little bit hard for you because you do have other siblings.
Yeah.
I think the little girl that asked only had one brother, and he passed away when he was a baby. So it's a little bit different than what...
That's sad.
Yes, it's very sad. But I know we've mentioned a few times that Jocelyn, who's our 4-year-old girl, and she was born after Evie, she often talks about being sad that she doesn't have a sister because she has Micah, an older brother, and Silas, a younger brother, but she misses that she doesn't have a sister.
Yeah.
And so sometimes she will just cry about it, honestly.
Cry.
Yeah, and she'll just say,
I want my sister.
Yeah, so she might be able to identify with that question a little more than Micah can.
Yeah.
So I know that she does feel like that sometimes. And in those times, I just try to be especially attentive and just hold Jocelyn and let her cry and let her talk about it. But I know that she would say she feels the same, that she wishes she had a sister. And that's just a very hard thing. It's a very, very hard thing. So if you're feeling like it's a very sad, hard thing, it really is. And it's okay to feel like that. And I'm just sorry that it's something that you have to think about.
Yep.
All right, Micah, this is another question that might be a little bit tricky.
Oh, no.
A little girl asked, are you glad that your mommy didn't die instead of your siblings?
That is a really, really, really hard question.
Yeah, it's pretty tricky. She even said, I know it might be hard to answer, but
Yeah.
you can just talk. We can just talk it through.
Well, not really. Probably everyone just wants all of their family to be together.
Yes.
That's my favorite thing, for all the family to be together sometimes.
Yeah, and so then we have 2 that aren't with us, and it can be sad.
Yeah.
But I think for the little girl that asked this question, and she is maybe thankful that she has her mommy, and she knows her little brother died, but her mommy is alive. That's okay to feel that you're glad that it wasn't your mommy. That's okay.
Or maybe it's like you're thankful for the people that you have.
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah, we're thankful for the people that we have. It doesn't mean we don't miss the ones that we don't have, but we're very thankful for
You
the
can
people.
still miss them
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yep. It's true. And it's okay to have that thought. Sometimes our brains just think of things like that, and it's okay to think, well, I'm really glad I have my mommy. Even though my brother's not here, I'm really glad to have my mommy. And that's an okay thing to think.
Yeah.
All right, Micah, do you have anything else to add? Those are all the questions I have for you. Do you have anything you want to add?
That's actually really short.
Well, what else would you like to say?
That if you're sad about any of your siblings, that you can pray.
Yeah. And the Lord will listen, and He's the God of all comfort. And He's the one who gave us Jesus to give us hope for seeing our siblings again one day. If we accept Christ as our Savior, then we're all going to be in the same place one day.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. Well, Micah, I just want to tell you that I appreciate that you were willing to come on here and talk about this, because it's kind of a hard subject, grief. Sometimes adults don't even like talking about grief, so the fact that you were willing to, and that you thought maybe it would help other kids, I think that is a big deal. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, well, I have 2 questions that I ask every guest who comes on the show, and you are a guest on the show. So here's one of them. As you are living out the story that God is writing just for you, what's a heart lesson He's reminding you of lately?
To be nice and to be respectful and to not like get sad or mad about anything that anyone says, like your mom or dad.
For example, if they say no more screen time.
Yeah.
That's a good heart lesson. That's
Yep.
something we can all learn for sure. All right, Micah, here's the last question. What is something that you are looking forward to?
Going to the pool tomorrow.
Yeah.
Going to the pool every Thursday.
Yeah, we have.
But maybe not the pool tomorrow since it's really rainy this week.
Yeah, we're having a rainy week. And usually we have pool day on Thursday.
Yep.
But I think it's going to be clear for the time that we're going to be at the pool. So there we go. All right, bud. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today. And I'm really thankful that you were willing to talk to other kids. And I hope that it is a big help to other kids who are in the same boat, that they have some siblings that aren't living in their home.
Yeah.
Because they're living in heaven. So thank you, buddy.
You're welcome.
High five. Well, friends, I hope that you found this episode to be helpful if you are a family who is grieving the loss of a sibling. I just hope that we were able to be a good resource for you, maybe a good jumping off point. At the very least, I just hope it was encouraging to your heart to know that there is another family who's kind of struggling and kind of trying to find their feet and their way to figure this whole thing out together. If you go to sarahrieke.com/podcast, there are going to be show notes for this episode, including resources that I think are helpful, that have been most helpful for me in processing my grief, that can kind of build that foundation for you to be able to help your kids and reach them as they're grieving as well. And then also just some additional resources that might be helpful for kids, links to Kathleen's ministry, if you think that would be something that's helpful for your family. Next week on the show is going to be Autumn Miles, and she's going to share her testimony of domestic violence and how she got out of a very unhealthy relationship and how she began to pursue a new identity in Christ, and just finding out that she wasn't permanently stained because of what happened to her. And her testimony is pretty incredible, and I can't wait to share that with you. Thank you, friends, for everyone who has left a rating and a review on iTunes. It's so helpful for the show, so encouraging for me to see that the podcast is reaching others for Christ. Thanks for tuning in to this episode today. I really, truly want to reiterate, I just hope it was just some encouragement for bereaved families. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via any social media, but you can also email me, sarahjrieke@gmail.com. Thank you for tuning in, friends. As always, I hope you found this episode to be inspiring and encouraging to help you walk well in the story that God has written especially for you. Bye, guys.